You've been told the monsters weren't real, that dragons and giants and one-eyed cannibals were things frightened people invented in the dark. But look closer at the oldest stories, and the same shape keeps surfacing underneath them. A bone too big to belong to anything living, a skull with a single hollow socket where no eye should be, a body dragged out of the ground that no one could name. The people who told these tales weren't lying to you. They were describing something they had actually found. And today, 6 monsters from folklore that turned out to be real. Here's the thing most of us forget. For almost all of human history, nobody knew about extinction. Nobody knew the Earth was old enough to have buried entire worlds of animals under our feet. So when a farmer turned up a thigh bone longer than his own leg, or a fisherman hauled up something with too many arms, there was only one explanation available to him: a monster. And the strangest part isn't that they were wrong, it's how often they were right. Because behind 6 of the oldest legends we have, there really was something down there. Let's start in the water. For centuries, sailors off the coast of Norway came home with the same story, and it was always told the same way. Quietly, by men who did not want to be laughed at. Out past the shallows, in water so deep the bottom had no name, something lived that was the size of an island. It would rise beneath a ship without warning, wrap the hull in arms as thick as masts, and pull the whole thing straight down into the black. They called it the kraken, and for a long time, the educated men on land treated it exactly the way you'd expect. A drinking story, a trick of fog and fear. There was no such animal, and everyone sensible knew it, except the bodies kept washing up. Every so often, a carcass would appear on a beach, half-rotted, with a beak like a parrot's the size of a human head and arms that trailed for 10 meters across the sand. Whalers cutting open sperm whales found circular scars gouged into their skin, rings of torn flesh the width of dinner plates, and undigested beaks sitting in the stomach like evidence swallowed whole. Something was fighting these whales in the deep, something with suckers the size of a grown man's hand. And still, no living person had ever laid eyes on it. It only existed as pieces, as damage, as leftovers. The animal is real. It's called the giant squid, Architethus, and it grows longer than a school bus, up to 12 or 13 meters from beak to tentacle tip. Its eyes are the largest of any animal that has ever lived, each one the size of a dinner plate, built to gather the faintest scraps of light half a kilometer down where the sun never reaches. For all of human history, it stayed there, in the dark, which is exactly why we couldn't catch it looking back. It wasn't hiding, we simply couldn't follow it down. And it isn't even the largest of its kind. In 2007, a fishing crew in the freezing waters near Antarctica hauled up a different animal entirely. The colossal squid, heavier and bulkier than the giant, close to half a ton of muscle, its arms lined not just with suckers but with rotating hooks. Its eyes are the largest known to science, wider than a human head, each one carrying a built-in light organ to hunt in total blackness. For as long as people have sailed, animals like this have been rising up out of the deep and vanishing again, leaving only scars and stories. The sailors weren't inventing a monster. They were describing one they'd only ever half seen. That changed in 2004, when a Japanese team led by Tsunemi Kubodera lowered a baited line into the deep water off the Ogasawara Islands and finally photographed a living giant squid attacking it. The first images of the animal alive, ever taken. 8 years later, in 2012, they went further and filmed one in its own world, a ghost-pale thing unspooling its arms out of the darkness toward the camera, calm and enormous and completely indifferent to us. The kraken was never a myth. It was a real animal, doing exactly what the sailors said it did, in a place we simply couldn't reach until now. The kraken had been hiding in the deep. The next monster had been hiding inside a rock. Go back nearly 3,000 years, to the islands of the Mediterranean, Sicily, Crete, Cyprus. People digging into hillsides and clearing out caves kept finding the same disturbing object. A skull. But not a human skull, and not one from any animal they could recognize. It was huge, twice the size of a man's head, heavy as stone, and set dead in the center of the face, where a nose should be, there was a single enormous socket. One vast, round, empty hole, staring out of the bone. Try to see it the way they did. These were people who had never seen an elephant. They had no framework, no picture in their minds of what this could belong to. What they had was a monstrous skull, far bigger than any person, with one gaping eye in the middle of its forehead, pulled, again and again, out of caves. And so they told the only story that fit the evidence in front of them. Once, This island was home to a race of one-eyed giants who lived in caves and ate men who wandered in. The Greeks gave that creature a name you still know, the Cyclops. The one-eyed, man-eating giant that Odysseus blinds in a cave in Homer's Odyssey, one of the oldest stories in Western literature. And read that story again with the skulls in mind, and the details line up almost too well. A giant, living in a cave, on a Mediterranean island, where the huge single-eyed heads were literally coming out of the ground. The skulls are real, and we know exactly what they are. They belong to dwarf elephants, a species that shrank over generations to survive on small islands, until some stood barely a metre tall. That giant central socket everyone mistook for an eye is not an eye at all. It's the nasal cavity, the opening where the trunk attached in life. The real eye sockets sit off to the sides, small and easy to overlook if you don't already know to look for them. In 1914, the paleontologist Athenio Abel laid it out plainly. The myth of the one-eyed giant almost certainly grew out of these skulls, misread by people doing their honest best to explain a monster in their hands. A false eye is unsettling enough, but at least no one built a shrine to it. That comes next. The year is 1335, and in a gravel pit just outside the town of Klagenfurt, in what's now Austria, workers strike something solid in the earth. They dig it free, and what comes up stops them cold. It's a skull. Long, massive, far too big for any animal they keep or hunt, and jutting from the front of it, a thick bony ridge like the base of a horn. Now, Klagenfurt already had a story. The marshes around the town were said to be the hunting ground of a lindworm, a winged dragon that dragged livestock and travellers down into the fog and swallowed them whole, until a band of heroes finally killed it. For generations that had been a tale to frighten children. And now, here in the mud, was its head. The skull went on display as proof. A real dragon, finally recovered, exactly where the legend said it would be. Think about what that would have done to a medieval town. The story your grandparents told to keep you out of the marshes was no longer just a story. Here was the head of the thing, heavy and undeniable, sitting where everyone could file past and touch it. The dragon had been real all along, and now they had the bones to prove it. And here's what makes this one different from all the others. The people of Klagenfurt didn't just tell the story, they built it a monument. In the late 1500s, a sculptor was commissioned to carve a great stone dragon for the town square. And to get the head right, he worked directly from that ancient skull, copying its real proportions into the stone. That statue still stands today, which means the dragon of Klagenfurt has an accurate, anatomically correct head, modelled from a genuine fossil. The fossil, of course, was not a dragon. It was the skull of a woolly rhinoceros, an Ice Age giant that died out more than 10,000 years ago, its horn long rotted away to leave only that suggestive ridge of bone. But historians of science point to that statue as something remarkable, often called the earliest known reconstruction of an extinct animal, carved centuries before anyone had the word extinct. A whole town looked at the bones of a lost Ice Age beast, saw a dragon, and immortalized it in stone. That rhinoceros had been dead for millennia. The next creature may still have been alive when the first storytellers described it. Sail south, into the waters below Arabia, and you enter the territory of a different monster, one that ruled the sky. Medieval sailors and traders spoke of it in hushed tones, and even Marco Polo wrote it down as fact. On an island far to the south, they said, lived a bird so vast it could seize a full-grown elephant in its talons, carry it into the clouds, and drop it to shatter on the rocks below. They called it the Rock. In the tales of Sinbad, a man survives only by lashing himself to the creature's leg and letting it haul him off the island. It was the kind of story you file under pure fantasy. A bird that eats elephants simply cannot be real. And yet the traders kept bringing proof north. Not the bird itself, but its eggs. Enormous eggs, over a foot long, with a circumference close to a metre, each one holding around 2 gallons. The volume of well over 100 chicken eggs packed into a single shell. Objects so large and so strange that they seem to confirm every word of the legend. Marco Polo even recorded that emissaries once carried what they claimed was a giant feather of the rock back to the court of the great Khan. Something laid those eggs. Something enormous, on an island in the south, exactly where the sailors said. That something was real, and it lived on Madagascar. We call it the elephant bird, and it was the largest bird that has ever existed. Flightless, standing up to 3 meters tall and weighing around half a ton, a feathered giant that towered over any human who came near it. Its eggs are the largest known from any animal that has ever lived, bigger than the eggs of the largest dinosaurs. The legend of a monstrous bird from a southern island wasn't invented. It was a slightly exaggerated field report. And here's the part that should sit with you. The elephant bird didn't die out in some unreachable prehistoric age. It survived until roughly 1,000 years ago, which means people lived alongside it, hunted it, ate those enormous eggs, and almost certainly drove it to extinction. The rock was real, and we are very likely the reason it's gone. A giant bird is one thing, but the next legend had a horn, and it looked its witnesses in the eye. The unicorn is so worn down by fairy tales now that it's hard to take seriously. A delicate white horse with a spiral horn, stitched onto lunchboxes and greeting cards. But strip that away and go back to the older versions, especially the ones that circulated across Russia and Central Asia, and the unicorn is something else entirely. Not a horse, a giant. A huge, heavy, shaggy beast, dark and slow and enormous, with one great horn rising from the middle of its skull. For a long time this was filed as pure folklore, a beast too outlandish to have ever walked the earth alongside the people who described it. The animal behind it is called elasmotherium, and it deserves the word monster. It was a rhinoceros, but scaled up to the size of a mammoth, as much as 4 tons of muscle and shaggy hair, standing taller at the shoulder than a man. On the front of its skull sat a massive dome of bone, and most researchers believe that dome anchored an enormous single horn, though the horn itself was keratin and rotted away like fingernail, so its exact size we have to infer. A single-horned giant, roaming the cold grasslands of Eurasia. A unicorn, in every way that matters except the delicate part. Picture the actual encounter. Not a slender white horse, but a wall of dark, shaggy hair, 4 tons heavy, moving slowly across the frozen steppe, with a horn, possibly a metre or more in length, swinging low over the grass. If you were a person on that steppe, you would not have found it charming. You would have found it terrifying. And you would have told your children about it long after it was gone. For decades, scientists assumed elasmotherium had vanished hundreds of thousands of years ago, long before any human could have watched it move. That assumption broke in 2018. A team led by Pavel Kosintsev radiocarbon dated the bones and found that this creature survived until around 39,000 years ago, well within the age of modern humans in Eurasia. Real people, our direct ancestors, almost certainly saw this thing with their own eyes. They watched a shaggy, one-horned giant graze on the steppe, and when it finally died out. Starved, most likely, as the climate changed and its grasslands disappeared. The memory of it didn't die. It cooled into a legend, and the legend became a unicorn. Our ancestors watched a unicorn go extinct. But the oldest monster of all isn't any single animal. It's the bones themselves. Because everywhere humans dug deep enough, all over the world, they found the same impossible things waiting in the ground. Thigh bones longer than a person is tall, teeth the size of a clenched fist, curved tusks pulled from the dirt like the horns of something vast. In Greece, communities built shrines around these bones and displayed them as the remains of fallen heroes and the titans of legend, giants who had warred with the gods and been buried beneath the mountains. Across the Americas, and across Europe well into the 1700s, oversized bones were shown off in churches and town halls as the last physical proof that giants had once walked among ordinary people. Every culture that dug into the earth found the same evidence and reached the same verdict. This world used to belong to giants. And they were right. The bones were real. The giants were real. They were mammoths and mastodons and other enormous Ice Age beasts. A mammoth's thigh bone really does look like it came from a 15-foot man, and its skull, with that great central hole where the trunk connected, looks unnervingly like a one-eyed giant all over again. When the naturalist Georges Cuvier finally studied these bones at the end of the 1700s, he used them to prove something that shook the world far more than any legend. That entire kinds of enormous animals had once lived, and then completely disappeared. The giants weren't a metaphor. They were a fact our ancestors had been staring at for thousands of years, without the science to name it. The earth genuinely was ruled, once, by things far larger than us, and every one of them is gone. That's the thread running under all 6 of these. The monsters were never conjured out of nothing. They were real animals and real bones, found by real people who did the best they could with what they held in their hands. And here's the part that should keep you up a little. Almost none of these were discovered on purpose. A skull in a gravel pit, a carcass on a beach, an egg carried out of a forest, a hillside that happened to be quarried. The finds were accidents, and the ground is still full of them. Right now, Permafrost that has held its dead frozen for 40,000 years is thawing faster every single summer, and it is handing back bodies so intact they still have hair and skin and blood. We have found the animals behind the old monsters. The unsettling question is what's still down there, waiting for the next accident to bring it up, and whether we'll have a name ready for it when it does. If stories like this are what you're here for, then stick around. The ground still keeps a great many of its secrets, and we are only just beginning to dig them up.